Steven Seagal walked into the event quietly, almost like a shadow slipping past the crowd. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just his signature black shirt, leather jacket, and worn boots. People turned as he moved, but none recognized him immediately. Some thought he was just another guest. Some barely noticed. Hillary Clinton was at the podium, giving a speech, her aides bustling around her. Seagal approached the entrance, calm, unassuming. "Do you have a seat reserved?" one aide asked, barely glancing at him. "No," Stephen replied evenly, his eyes scanning the room. The aide hesitated, clearly unsure. "Then you'll have to stand over there," she said, pointing toward an empty corner. Stephen nodded silently and stepped aside. He didn't argue. He didn't make a scene, but what no one realized was the room had just disrespected one of the most powerful men present, and he knew exactly what they were thinking. People whispered. Some laughed under their breath. Others glanced at him like he was out of place. He didn't move. He didn't react. He simply stood there, letting the silence grow, letting the tension build. 7 minutes passed. Hillary continued her speech, oblivious. Her aides continued their busy work, checking phones and shuffling papers. No one acknowledged Stephen. No one offered a word. No one cared, and that was exactly the point. He was testing them. Seeing who would recognize real presence. Seeing who would understand that power isn't always loud, sometimes it's quiet. Measured, impossible to ignore once revealed. The room was alive with energy. Yet completely unaware of the storm standing just a few feet away. People judge based on appearances, based on assumptions. They never see the calm before the storm. They never see the strength behind a composed silence. Stephen's gaze swept the room, sharp and unblinking, every whisper, every nervous glance, every laugh at his supposed insignificance. He remembered everything, and he was just getting started. Most people in the room had no idea who Steven Seagal really was. To them, he was just another celebrity who occasionally appeared in news clips or magazine covers. Some even thought of him as just an action movie star, a Hollywood persona built for cameras and stunts. But the truth was far more complex. Stephen wasn't just a film actor. He was a martial arts master, trained in multiple combat disciplines with decades of real-world experience that went far beyond movie sets. He had connections in circles most people could only dream of: law enforcement, international security, and political spheres. He understood strategy, human behavior, and influence in ways that few could imagine, and yet he had stayed away from public attention for years. No red carpets, no flashy interviews, no social media posts to remind anyone of his power. He preferred observation, silence, and understanding the truth behind people's actions. That morning, he had arrived unannounced at this high-profile event. Not to show off, not to intimidate, not to assert dominance. He had come for one reason: to see how people treated others. When they thought they had all the power, the crowd in the room was bustling with excitement, but it was the kind of excitement that often blinded people. Everyone was so focused on titles, protocols, and appearances that no one noticed the quiet presence standing in the corner. Hillary Clinton continued her speech, smiling and gesturing while her aides flitted around, managing logistics and checking notes. To them, Steven Seagal was nothing more than a background figure, a passerby with no significance. And that was exactly the perspective he wanted them to have, because respect, true respect, isn't given to the loud or the obvious. It's shown in how people treat those they assume have no importance. As he observed, Stephen noticed subtle reactions. The aides' eyes darted nervously when he glanced at them. Some guests whispered to each other, subtly pointing or laughing under their breath. No one offered a smile. No one offered a greeting. No one even acknowledged his presence. It was a test, a quiet, careful observation. And with each passing minute, he learned more about human behavior than any speech or report could reveal. The room was filled with arrogance and assumption. People believed they understood the hierarchy of power. They assumed titles and appearances dictated influence. They assumed that someone standing quietly in the corner couldn't possibly have authority or knowledge that could disrupt their plans. But Stephen knew otherwise. For years, he had watched people underestimate those who didn't flaunt their power. He had seen deals made behind closed doors. He had seen people manipulate situations, assuming no one would notice. And he had learned that arrogance always reveals itself if you wait long enough. That morning, he wasn't there to confront anyone. Yet, he wasn't there to prove a point immediately. He was there to observe, to understand, and to remember. Every gesture, every laugh, every dismissive glance, it all mattered. Every subtle act of disrespect was a clue. And by the end of the day, those clues would form a complete picture, because, in the end, it's not just about being ignored. It's about how people behave when they think they're safe from accountability. Stephen's eyes swept the room one last time. He didn't speak. He didn't react. He simply waited, and everyone in that room had no idea that the moment of reckoning was already approaching. Have you ever noticed how people treat you when they think you're unimportant? Steven Seagal remained in the corner, silent, observing. Everything around him, executives, staff, and aides bustled past him, completely unaware of who he was or perhaps choosing to ignore him. One executive glanced at his leather jacket and black shirt, a smirk crossing his face before turning back to his phone. Another whispered to a colleague, laughing at what they assumed was an inconsequential outsider. A few others glanced briefly, their eyes flicking away as if acknowledging him might break some invisible rule. Hillary Clinton continued speaking at the podium, completely focused on the audience and her talking points. Her team was equally busy, shuffling papers, sipping coffee, adjusting microphones, making sure the optics of the event were perfect. 7 minutes passed. No one approached Stephen. No one offered a word. No one even nodded. He wasn't just invisible. He was being deliberately ignored, and that, Stephen knew, spoke volumes. He wasn't standing there to demand attention. He was standing there to observe, to see the truth of how people behave when they assume they're in control, because real character, he had learned, is revealed in moments of subtle arrogance. A staffer walked past him, glancing briefly at his boots, then rolling her eyes and hurrying off. Another executive whispered a joke under their breath, clearly thinking they were clever. Even the photographer, snapping photos of the podium, barely noticed the quiet figure standing at the edge of the room. It was a symphony of disrespect, a chorus of assumptions. And every action, every subtle slight was being recorded in Stephen's mind. He could feel the tension building in the room without moving a muscle. It wasn't loud, it wasn't explosive. It was silent, calculated, and terrifying in its inevitability. The room was alive with laughter, conversation, and the hum of confidence, yet entirely unaware of the storm in their midst. People were judged by appearances. They assumed that, because he wasn't flanked by bodyguards or making a spectacle, he lacked authority. They believed his silence was weakness, but Stephen knew better. Power isn't always loud. Influence doesn't need announcements. And respect? True respect isn't demanded. It's earned, and it's noticed by those who pay attention. As he continued to observe, subtle cues emerged. A nervous glance here, a fidgeting hand there, a whispered comment meant to belittle him. Each moment revealed the same truth. Arrogance blinds people to the presence of real strength. They assume the world revolves around their own importance. They forget that someone patient, disciplined, and observant can see through every pretense. Stephen didn't flinch. He didn't react. He simply remained, calm and unshaken, allowing the room to reveal itself in full. 7 minutes might have felt like nothing to the others. To Stephen, it was a revelation. It was the confirmation of what he already suspected. People often reveal their worst qualities when they think no one is watching, and he was watching every move, every whisper, every laugh. Because one day the silence would end, and when it did, they would understand exactly who they had disrespected. Steven Seagal had been standing quietly for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, only minutes had passed. Every whisper, every laugh, every dismissive glance had been meticulously noted in his mind. The room, alive with chatter, networking, and political posturing, remained completely unaware that the man they ignored was about to change everything. Then, without warning, Stephen moved. Not with haste, not with anger, Not the stage, not the podium. Straight into the heart of the room where decisions were made, where egos ruled, where arrogance thrived. The room froze the moment he entered, eyes widened. A glass clinked against a coaster and no one noticed. Ifal, what are you doing here? Someone snapped, trying to assert authority, though their voice wavered. Stephen said nothing. He didn't need words. His presence alone demanded attention. He reached the center of the room. Every person in the room suddenly realized too late that this wasn't just a visitor, a celebrity, or a bystander. This was someone with insight, power, and the patience to let arrogance reveal itself. He placed a small folder on the table. Just a calm, deliberate act. The room went silent. The laughter all vanished. Faces changed. Smiles disappeared. Eyes darted nervously. It was a symbol of truth, a warning, and a reminder. Ignoring power doesn't erase it. Disrespect doesn't go unnoticed. Stephen's gaze swept the room. No words, no threats. Just observation. Every person there could feel it. A weight settling in their chest. The realization dawning that they had misjudged someone they assumed to be powerless. Hillary Clinton herself looked up from her notes, eyebrows raised, an almost imperceptible flicker of unease crossing her face. She had thought this was just another public appearance, another routine event, but the calm intensity standing before her now was impossible to ignore. A hush fell over the room. Even the aides, usually confident and composed, shifted nervously. They had glimpsed the power that silence can carry, and it terrified them. Then Stephen spoke, softly, measured, every word deliberate. I didn't come here to be acknowledged, he said. I came to see how people treat others when they think no one is watching. He paused. The silence stretched, unbroken, amplifying the weight of his words. And now, he continued, his voice steady, you see exactly what arrogance looks like. A shiver ran through the room. People fidgeted, avoiding his gaze. Awareness is deadly. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move, because in that room the dynamic had shifted. The powerless observer was now the fulcrum of control. Was only the beginning. The moment of reckoning was near. The arrogance, the disrespect, and the illusions of power were about to be exposed. In ways no one could have anticipated. The silence in the room was suffocating. Every eye was on Seagal. Even Hillary Clinton and her aides, usually composed and confident, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. Stephen didn't rush. He didn't shout. Contrast to the panic simmering quietly behind every polite smile and forced posture, and then it happened. The door at the back of the room opened slightly. An employee stepped in, carrying a stack of files that seemed heavier than they should have been. His hands trembled, his voice shook. They were planning to sell the company, he stammered, eyes wide as he glanced at Stephen. Secret transfers, hidden deals, hundreds of employees at risk. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, thick and impossible to ignore. The room erupted not in noise, but in a subtle chaos. Executives whispered frantically, aides exchanged terrified glances. Hillary herself leaned forward, the faintest trace of disbelief in her expression. Stephen didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply opened the folder he had placed on the table. Inside were documents, contracts, emails, internal memos. Every file confirmed what the employee had said. The disrespect, the arrogance, the blind assumption of power, it all tied into. It wasn't about smirks or whispers. It was about deceit, manipulation, deflect, muttering excuses. It's not what it seems. It was just a misunderstanding. But Stephen's gaze, calm and unyielding, silenced them instantly. The room realized something terrifying. Every slight, every whisper, every act of deception had been noticed, remembered, and cataloged. Stephen leaned slightly forward, placing a hand on the folder. I came here to see how people treat others when they think they have the upper hand, he said, voice measured, controlled. And, now the truth is clear. No one moved. No one dared speak. The tension was palpable. It wasn't fear of violence, it was fear of exposure. Arrogance, once comfortable in its bubble of assumed control, was now exposed for what it really was. The employee who had delivered the files swallowed hard. I didn't know what to do, he admitted, voice barely audible. They thought no one was watching, but Stephen, he stopped, unable to continue. Plans that could have destroyed livelihoods. Millions quietly being moved without oversight. And all of it would have gone unnoticed. If not for the quiet figure they had assumed was powerless. Stephen closed the folder, a deliberate, calm motion. He didn't need theatrics. The room understood. Completely. The arrogance, the disrespect, and the betrayal had been fully exposed, and now decisions had to be made because disrespect isn't harmless. Arrogance isn't harmless. Betrayal isn't harmless. It leaves a trail. And Stephen had just followed it straight to its source. Every person in that room now faced a choice: admit, repent, and learn, or face the consequences of their disregard. The shift was unmistakable. Power had moved. Respect, long ignored, was now demanded, not by threats. Do you think a single lesson in accountability could change them? Or would arrogance always find a way back? Because in that moment, the employees understood something critical. Disrespect isn't just a personal slight. It's a reflection of character. And character, when exposed, cannot be hidden. Steven Seagal didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to fight. All he had done was reveal the truth, and the room had crumbled quietly under the weight of its own arrogance. The quiet observation had become an unshakable power. The ignored man had become the center of control. And what followed next would leave everyone in that room forever changed. The room remained frozen. Every eye was on Steven Seagal. Every whisper had died. Even the aides who had once moved with confidence now shuffled nervously, unsure of how to proceed. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. His calm, controlled presence said more than words ever could. The silence itself was a statement, a measure of the weight his observation carried. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't come here to be recognized," he said, his voice low, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "I came to see how you treat people when you think they don't matter." A subtle shiver ran through the room. People shifted in their seats. Some tried to maintain composure. Others froze entirely, realizing that the arrogance they had clung to so confidently was now meaningless. "You assumed I was powerless," he continued. "You assumed your whispers, your jokes, and your dismissals could go unnoticed. You assumed no one would hold you accountable." The folder he had placed on the table was now open, pages spread out like evidence in a courtroom, contracts, secret deals, plans to exploit the company, hidden transfers that could ruin careers. Every file told a story of deception and betrayal. Stephen's eyes swept the room slowly, deliberately, ensuring that everyone felt the weight of his presence. "And now," he said, pausing for effect, "you will understand what consequences look like." No one moved. No one dared speak. Because they knew this wasn't a bluff. They had witnessed the calm power that could dismantle arrogance silently and decisively. Security personnel, previously unnoticed in the corner of the room, stepped forward quietly. Their movement was subtle but unmistakable. The shift in energy was palpable. The balance of power had changed in an instant. "You're all terminated." "Effective immediately," Stephen said, his voice calm but final. Shock rippled across the room. Executives gasped. Aides froze. Even Hillary Clinton, usually composed, took a small step back, recognizing that this decision was both deliberate and irreversible. The moment was quiet, yet heavy with authority. No shouting, no chaos. Just undeniable, controlled power. Stephen continued, addressing them directly. "You treated those around you with arrogance, ignoring respect and decency. You assumed titles and appearances made you untouchable. You assumed no one was watching." He let his words sink in, letting the weight of accountability settle into the room. Respect isn't given because of your position. Respect is earned through your actions. And when you fail to recognize that, there are consequences. The employees, once confident and brash, now realized how thoroughly they had misjudged him. The quiet observer they had ignored, the man they had assumed powerless, was now the one in full control. He didn't revel in their fear. He didn't gloat. He simply stood, composed, allowing the truth to have its effect. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about accountability. It was about showing that arrogance, when left unchecked, will always reveal itself. Even the aides, who had once whispered and laughed under their breath, understood it now. No power, no title, no facade could hide true character from someone patient enough to observe. And remember this, Stephen added, voice steady, unwavering. Power is meaningless without respect. Arrogance is exposed, and those who underestimate others will always be the first to fall. The security team quietly escorted the terminated executives out, a visible reminder that actions have consequences. Fear, humility, and clarity filled the room simultaneously. Stephen's calm authority had transformed the energy in the space. What was once chaos and arrogance became order and reflection. The lesson had been delivered not with violence, but with patience, observation, and decisive action. The room had seen the full measure of his power, silent, deliberate, and unyielding. And no one would ever forget it. If you believe respect matters more than status, like this, arrogance may seem safe, but it always reveals itself in time. And patience is often the most powerful weapon of all. The room was silent. Every whisper, every laugh, every act of arrogance that had filled the space hours ago had vanished. Fear, respect, and awe hung heavily in the air. As thick as the tension that had preceded it, Steven Seagal stood among them, calm, composed, yet undeniably in control. The terminated executives had been escorted out, a subtle but unmistakable demonstration that disrespect carries consequences. The employees who remained were quiet, eyes downcast, hands fidgeting nervously. They had witnessed the power of observation, patience, and decisive action, and it had left an impression that would not fade easily. Stephen looked at the room, letting the moment settle before speaking. "Your jobs are safe," he said, his voice steady and measured, carrying the weight of authority without aggression. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. People had feared punishment, humiliation, or worse. But Stephen's approach wasn't about vengeance. It was about teaching a lesson, one that went far beyond titles, appearances, or temporary power. "This company," he continued, "will never judge people by their clothes, their status, or the position they hold." He paused, letting the words sink in, watching as the employees absorbed the meaning behind them. "True character," he said, "is shown in how you treat people you think have no power. Not when the cameras are on, not when it's convenient, but when no one is watching, because those moments reveal the real you." The employees shifted, some nodding silently, some glancing at each other in quiet acknowledgement. It was a lesson that could not be unlearned. Arrogance, when exposed, leaves a mark. Disrespect, when observed, has consequences. And integrity, when demonstrated, inspires respect even in the most unlikely places. Hillary Clinton, who had been at the podium just moments ago, now regarded Stephen with a mix of surprise and acknowledgement. She had witnessed firsthand the patience, the quiet strength, and the precision with which he had dismantled arrogance without raising a hand. The lesson was clear. Power without respect is fragile, and those who ignore it do so at their own peril. Stephen walked slowly through the room, making eye contact with those present. Not a single glance was missed. Every individual felt the weight of his presence, not through fear of punishment, but through the clarity of his judgment. It was a reminder that respect cannot be faked, status cannot shield you from accountability, and true strength often speaks in silence. He stopped at the center of the room, allowing the employees to gather around him. "From this day forward," he said, "this company will value people for who they are, not for what they appear to be. Because the world does not reward arrogance, it does not reward disregard. It rewards integrity, humility, and respect." The employees listened intently. Some had learned this lesson the hard way, having been replaced or confronted directly. Others had witnessed the consequences without being directly involved. All of them understood that the landscape of power and respect had shifted irreversibly. Stephen paused again, letting the weight of his words fill the room. Then, in his calm, measured tone, he added, "Arrogance will always expose itself. Disrespect will always be noticed. And patience. Patience will always reveal the truth. The message was clear, powerful, and unforgettable. It was not delivered through anger or aggression, but through observation, timing, and the quiet certainty of someone who had seen it all before. As he prepared to leave, the employees reflected on what had just occurred. The room, once chaotic with unchecked egos, now felt orderly, respectful, and conscious of its actions. The lesson had been learned: respect is not optional, arrogance is fragile, and integrity cannot be hidden. Stephen turned toward the exit, pausing one last time. "Remember this," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "Weakness is ignored. Arrogance is exposed, and true character always reveals itself. Do not wait until it is too late to understand this. Treat others with respect always. Because respect is not given, it is earned, and it is noticed, even when you think no one is watching." With that, he left the room. The silence lingered, heavier now with reflection than with tension. Everyone present knew that the events of that day would stay with them forever. Not just as a story of confrontation, but as a story of the quiet, unstoppable power of patience, observation, and moral authority. And for the employees who remained, the lesson was clear. True power is measured not by the fear you can inspire, but by the respect you command, the humility you show, and the integrity you maintain, even when it seems no one is watching. Do you think Stephen made the right decision? Should the executives have faced harsher consequences, or was the lesson enough? Comment below, like if respect should be unconditional.